All right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Beaver Politics, where we talk about Canadian politics and social issues. Every Monday night, we host Indigenous Matters. I'm your host. I'm Treaty 6 birder. Just a little bit about my name. I live in Treaty 6, and I'm an avid bird watcher and an ornithologist, so that's why I'm a birder. And in this live, we talk about various issues with regards to Indigenous matters in Canada, Indigenous rights, natural resources. We talk about some history sometimes. We talk about the history of treaties. And you'll see above my name right here, those are the 7 sacred teachings. Those are Anishinaabe teachings, and we like to use those to guide us in our conversations while we're here in Beaver Politics and talking about Indigenous matters. So that's honesty, respect, wisdom, love, humility, courage, and truth. So I ask that everybody, if you want to come up and be part of the conversation, to be mindful of our teachings. I also ask that everybody take the time to listen to one another, listen to understand, not to respond. In our teachings and in our way, we like to give each other the space to say what needs to be said. Sometimes as Indigenous people, we take a little bit longer to get to our points, but it's all relevant. And when you listen closely, you'll hear the relevance of everything that's being brought forward during the discussion. So one rule I like to set is nobody talks twice until everybody has spoken once. And tonight's topic is lateral violence. And this has come up because we've all faced lateral violence, and it's something that has become prevalent in our communities, but now also we're seeing it in social media as well. I'm going to just read to you all a little bit of how the National Women's Association of Canada, the Native Women's Association of Canada, defines it. They have a nice PDF on their website if you're interested, and it's really I like this. I used it in the past, and I find it really easy to understand. So I'm going to share that with you all. I want to remind you too: tapping is clapping, and sharing is caring. We do have a gift goal, so if you're able to provide gifts, that would be wonderful. Okay, so lateral violence, and especially in relation to Indigenous communities. What is it? Although a worldwide occurrence, this fact sheet is about how lateral violence impacts Aboriginal people. Unlike workplace bullying, lateral violence differs in that Aboriginal people are now abusing their own people in similar ways that they have been abused. It is a cycle of abuse, and its roots lie in factors such as colonization, oppression, intergenerational trauma, and the ongoing experiences of racism and discrimination. Through these factors, Aboriginal people now become the oppressor, and within the workplace or community, they now direct abuse to people of their own gender, culture, sexuality, and profession. In other words, instead of directing their anger at the oppressor, these workplace or community aggressors now direct their anger at their own peers or community members. Other terms for lateral violence also include workplace bullying, horizontal hostilities or violence, internalized colonialism, relational aggression. And here's a quote on this fact sheet from Jane Middleton Moss. When a powerful oppressor has directed oppression against a group for a period of time, members of the oppressed group feel powerless to fight back, and they eventually turn against each other. And this is a true phenomenon. I know many of the Indigenous people that might be in the room right now are likely to have experienced themselves this sad outcome of colonialism. I've seen it, I've witnessed it, I have experienced it, and I have probably perpetrated it myself without really meaning to or knowing what it was until I gained the awareness of what it was and how it happens. It's really sad because when you see it happening in community, it's kind of an ugly place. You see how it's a taught behavior. Especially those that spent time in residential schools, especially schools that were not kind schools. We have heard that there were some schools that were better than others, and there were some nuns that were kind and caring, and some nuns that were bullies and abusers, and same with the priests and the brothers and whomever else was in those institutions. So those were taught behaviors to oppress one another. And when you remind ourselves about the phenomenon of children that were raised in residential schools by abusive nuns and priests and brothers and others that worked in those institutions, that's all they were taught. They weren't taught how to parent properly because they were removed from their parents. They weren't taught how to love or to offer empathy or sympathy or compassion for one another. They weren't taught how to comfort each other either. I have read some things where a lot of comforting did happen between the students and stuff, but it was frowned upon, and you had to sneak, because if you got caught consoling your sister or cousin or someone else, the nun or the priest could abuse you. So that's an outcome, and these are learned behaviors that survivors from residential schools now come back home and start having their own children, but because they were never taught to parent properly either, and they were taught by some of our people by abusive people of authority, that's what they learned. And it kind of trickles down now into our workplaces and into our other relationships on reserve, and even in our own Indigenous organizations. I've seen some of the most professional, educated Indigenous people do this to each other. And it's not intentional, I don't believe. It is just a symptom of the sickness. So I'd like to talk tonight about, our experiences in lateral violence, how we've dealt with it in the past, how you think you maybe didn't deal with it properly, or how you could deal with it better. And maybe we can share some tools and tips and tricks with each other on how to combat it and help those that perpetrate it see their ways, which is a challenge, because I've seen, this is an interesting outcome I've seen. I have witnessed with my own eyes that the greatest perpetrators of lateral violence are the first ones to cry lateral violence, because when you try to address their behaviors, that's the first thing they come back with, is now we're being laterally violent to them. So it's a really challenging, difficult discussion to have, a challenging position to be in and situation, because we love each other and we care about each other, but sometimes it's easier to lash out at one another and those you love. Like I can say from my own personal experience, even in my home life, because my father has the internalized shame from being an Indigenous man, he can be guilty of lashing out in anger rather than in other emotions, and that's displaced. It's just because it's an emotion that's easy, I think, as humans. So this is what we're going to chat about tonight. I think I saw Jana in the room, and if I know that you have a psychology background, so if you're interested in joining us, Jana, I would love that very much. But I'm going to turn the floor, because Smarshy was the one who brought this to my attention, that she's been experiencing this occasionally in some live rooms and with some of our other in other places where she's been called a pretendian, and we can explore pretendians and that concept as well. But let's talk a little bit about lateral violence and some of our experiences we've had in that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Smarshy, if you're okay with that.
Oh yeah, no, I'm okay.
Thank you.
And within reason, yes, I may have not known about my indigenous culture because I didn't grow up in it, and I may have said some things that were not true, but not really looking into the history of our culture. And it that does stem from a lot of like misconceptions, and it can hurt our people. I'm aware of what can be considered dangerous, but I'm also aware of, we need to have grace with reconnecting people because, again, our culture was stolen from us. It wasn't something that was able to be practiced. And I've talked to many, many people, and I've been called a pretendian, and I've been called this, and I've been called that. And honestly, it hurts. I was in a live tonight, like I was talking earlier about it. Um, there was a guy in there that I was friends with, and I sat there and he literally said that Indigenous people need to eradicate white people. And I was like, no, like that's not what we do. That's not that's not how it is. That's not how it should be. We should just understand that, we were survival. It was survival. Like we had to fight for our rights. And it's not something that we wanted to have happen. It's something that we needed to do to protect ourselves. And that's a big thing.
Excuse me.
And
May I
that's
ask
why it
you a
hurts so
question?
much. Yeah.
So, do you know, was this individual, has this person grown up on reserve or in close proximity to their Indigenous community?
The person that I'm talking about that I
Yeah,
was in a live with today,
yeah.
no, they are a white man.
Oh, that was a white person
That was a YT person, yeah.
saying to you that Indigenous people should eradicate white
Eradicate.
people.
Yeah.
That's interesting. The
Yeah.
one thing, the reason I ask, and because you've told me in the past, and I share the same history, is that you weren't raised in your culture and with your identity, and neither was I. I'm Indigenous presenting, so of course I faced racism, and I was called an Indian, and mostly a dirty Indian, but and I had to learn that way, right? But I was never in a community of just Indigenous people. I was never exposed to language, culture, things like that. So it took me some time to learn to be quiet when I'm with other Indigenous people and just listen to their story sometimes and their side and their wisdom. Because um, I'm going to share a teaching that I've gained over the years. Some Indigenous people, when we see us, those that didn't experience that same lived experience, as I don't want to say less than, but like we come across as like we are trying to be like them or we claim to be like them when
Right.
we really aren't. We didn't live that same life. So it feels, and then they see us too living a different lifestyle. I know you've had struggles. I've had struggles as well, but the perceptions, this is all about perceptions, and a lot of the lateral violence, from my experience, what I've witnessed, comes from when we don't sit down and take the time to understand each other. We're just perceiving what whatever our assumptions are about certain people. And I do have friends that are strong Nehiyaw or Indigenous women who are very firm about how they feel about people like me and you coming into this space, because um, they're protective of it in some way. And I feel like maybe some of it comes from too is they've experienced so much harm and abuse and discrimination, and they live at lower standards, and they don't even have the same level of education offered to them sometimes in their communities. All of that rolled into one, and we come along and claim to be equal in some way, right? And I hope, I don't even know if I'm explaining it properly, but it doesn't feel good to them sometimes, because um it's like we're taking away from their position. I don't know how,
Right.
maybe we can explore this some more, because um maybe even Real Native and Curtis can help me articulate this better. But one thing I have seen happen, especially with the increase of um Métis. Now there's a lot more people claiming their Métis identity. And there are a lot of First Nation people who are quite upset about this. And one lady put it very well for me to understand. She said, they were all comfortable with their white privilege. And now that it's fashionable, or it seems like there's some kind of perceived benefit to being Indigenous, they want to claim their identity. And I get where that comes from too. So there are so many layers to where we are right now in time, because coming out of colonialism, excuse me, and how many different types of lived experiences we have. We have folks that went to residential school. We have folks that didn't go to residential school. We have folks that are very assimilated, some that are traditionalists. We have Métis. We have 60s scoop. We have all kinds of versions of us. So it's really challenging for us to sometimes hold space for each other. But anyways, I just wanted to share that with you, Smarshy, because I too have, and I've been called, people have perceived me as pretendian as well because I grew up in a different way.
Hmm. No, that makes more sense. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and seriously, like one of the things sometimes, it's hard when we're in these spaces on internet. In person you can read the room a lot better, right? It's easier to kind of read people's body language or how they've responded or reacted to something you've said, which is a little more challenging in these spaces. So I find sometimes being more quiet or trying to listen a little more is beneficial too in trying to combat lateral violence. But
I get that.
did you have anything else you wanted? Because I do recall you had, this isn't, excuse me, I'm still trying to get over my cold. This wasn't an isolated incident though, right? You've
No,
experienced this.
and this is like, and you're right, like going into spaces where there are people that have lived on the res and lived that experience, I have understood that that could be considered as lateral damage, and I get it.
Yeah.
Now I go into spaces where there are Indigenous people, and if the elders are speaking, I listen. I listen to listen, not listen to respond. And if I have a question, I'll ask them if it's okay if I ask a question. Because going forward, I want to do better. I don't want to cause lateral damage, and I don't mean to cause lateral damage. And that's what I really had to understand was
Yeah.
just like you said, be quiet and just listen.
Excuse me. Yeah. And in my experience, it's kind of been for me, what works best is to try to check my behavior and stop my how I'm acting or what I'm doing to contribute and try to listen. There are things I've seen that are like lateral violence I've witnessed can be really awful. Like amongst family members on reserve, I've seen around council tables and things, you can tell who supports who, and you see some of the backstabbing or the talking behind people's backs, and even outright people trying to prevent the good work of others happening. So, but I would like to turn it over to Real Native if you'd like to add to the conversation, and if your grandbaby's giving you some time.
Sure. I find that this is just my take on it. Um, the the lateral violence I find sometimes the lateral violence comes from people who think that they know better, or they think that nobody's ever supposed to challenge them on something, or they say something that they don't like. I've been there. I've had people say things and I just didn't agree with it, and I didn't want to agree to disagree. But I've run into a couple of people where, for instance, like I don't subscribe to the term Native American. I That's for the Southern cousins. That's their word. Up here we call ourselves First Nations or one second, baby. 1 second. Up here we call ourselves First Nations, or we call ourselves um, Indigenous.
Yeah.
And this one lady, I tried to tell her, like, if you're talking about Canadians, the Canadian south or north of the Medicine Line, then we refer to ourselves as First Nations. And she replied, I don't give a F what you guys think. You're all Native American, you know. And I took offense to that. But if you've ever seen, I won't out this lady's live because she does do good work for Indigenous people. She is Indigenous. And one second, baby. It's not cooled off yet. She wants her KD,
Yeah.
and she wants her. But she does do good work for Indigenous people, and she does do a lot of educational stuff. So, I mean, she just she's set in her ways, and
Yeah.
she doesn't want anyone telling her that she could be wrong. You know, and that to me is lateral violence.
Yeah.
You know.
And how about in your own band office? Do you see it there too sometimes? Like I've seen it. I really saw when I worked on reserve that there's kind of a caste system, unfortunately, of like the haves and the have nots and the ones that, especially the folks that work in the band office.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then the ones that come in for services and stuff. And I saw that there's definitely tensions between them sometimes.
Yeah,
And some of
like
the folks look down at each other, right? Like those that struggle
yeah,
with addictions and stuff, and that is a form of lateral violence too.
yeah. Like I have a cousin who's caught up in the whole rug scene. The bad stuff that starts with an M. And I do my best to help her when I see her. She's in a bad way. Um, I I honestly wouldn't be surprised if someone told me tomorrow that she had passed. That's how bad it is. But a lot of people look at her now as a no good addict, and she should just quit bugging people, stuff like that. And it wasn't that long ago, 3 years ago, where she was working for the elders and she wasn't on any of this stuff,
Right.
you
Oh,
know, and nobody was thinking like this about her. But now that she's having a hard time, everybody's on her case. You know, um, she she had a run of bad luck. She had a daughter who's into the same rug,
hmm.
and this daughter cost her her job, her vehicle, everything except her house, and that came close to being taken away. Um, but you know, nobody was saying that about her then. So I mean, she's had a lot happen to her in just a span of 3 years. That's caused her to um, fall into this lifestyle. Do I think it was, it's acceptable way of dealing with, you know, a string of bad luck? No. Um, do I condemn her for it? No. Um, it's just one of those things, But there are a lot of people that see her at the band office, and they just, to them, she's a no good addict, and it's sad to see.
It is, and I agree that is a form of lateral violence as well because they've forgotten that she was that good person at one time too.
Yeah.
And rather than trying to find the ways in which we can help or heal her, but this
Hmm.
again is speaks to how we are all broken, right? We all struggle, um and I remember seeing, now even just thinking about it from the workplace, I remember seeing folks coming up with really good ideas to do things for the nation and for the community members, and some family members didn't want it because it was you hired. Oh, what I was hiring. Okay, this is one thing. I was hiring a fencing crew,
Right.
and so I was interviewing guys and stuff, right? And I see you, Smarshy. I'll get to you, honey. And this one guy came back to me after the interviews, and he's like, "Well, did I get the job?" And I'm like, "No, I'm sorry, you didn't," because he was really didn't interview well, right?
Yeah.
And then he says to me, "Wow, you probably hired all your family members," and I'm
Yeah.
not even from there.
Yeah.
But that too, right? So that just
Yes.
is shows you how
Yeah.
he himself felt overlooked, and maybe because, and I've seen it too, there's the families that everybody kind of reveres, and then the families that people all kind of talk about and say they're not good
Yeah.
or they're problems and troublemakers and addicts and whatever, right? So
There was there was one guy like back in the 80s. He's an older guy, I remember. Um, and he had applied for a job on the reserve. And my dad and the council had delegated it to 3 people from different families on the reserve to do the hiring. You're okay, baby.
It's not.
But but um, this guy came back to my dad. My dad was leaving work one day, and he said, did I get the job? And my dad said, I don't know. Did you talk to the 3 people? And he said, yeah, and they told me I didn't get the job. And my dad said, well, sounds like you didn't get the job then. And he, instead of, telling my dad, well, you probably had something to do with this, you probably wanted to hire your own family. He asked my dad, he said, what did I do wrong in the interview? And my dad told him, he said, why don't you ask them what you did wrong? And you can improve on that on the next interview.
Yeah.
And
And that's good. And your dad, I understand, was the chief at the time, right? So uh, was that, and I see that too. A lot of folks, well, they didn't get their way with the manager, so they're going to go to the chief or the counselor to try to get their way. But and Smarchy, I saw your hand, but remember the rule: nobody talks twice till everybody's spoken once. So if you've got a pen and paper, write your comment down, and we'll get
Oh,
back
it's
to you.
just
Okay?
about a person in the comments. We were trying to get
Oh,
some
okay. Well,
individuals.
we won't worry about the comments right now. Like, we got people in there that are talking back to those folks that, so, everybody's welcome to have their voice. And if anybody needs to be muted or anything like that, let me know and I can do that. Okay, let's go to Curtis, my friend.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cree from Alberta. Our topic tonight is lateral violence, and that's a
Yes.
huge topic. I've seen it growing up all my life, and now I try to focus a lot on lateral kindness because I've seen like the crabs in a bucket type of thing. I've seen that growing up, and myself, I grew up as a non-status person, then I ended up getting Métis status, and then like I seen like within our community, I always seen ourselves as one people, like First Nations, Métis. We're all related and somehow, and I always seen us as one people. But the government creates these legal definitions to separate us, like Bill C-31, Métis, and I remember when I got my status, and I was kind of happy. I got my letter in the mail that I was first, like I got my treaty card, like your Indian status certificate letter, whatever. I had applied and got it. Took me quite a few years. And I went to go show this guy that I was happy, and I showed it to him. And he looked at me with disgust, and he threw my letter on the ground, and he swore at me. He said, that just makes me effing sick, eh? He said, all you Métis people are getting in, and my girlfriend can't even get in. Then he walked away. And I was kind of like, I wasn't expecting that reaction from him because I thought he was a friend of mine. but that's how he felt, eh? And then I realized, like, not everyone's happy. Like, you can't really broadcast things, eh? It was a good learning experience for me, but that guy was dealing with his own issues, and so I just kind of like picked up the paper, and I thought, oh well, I guess I won't tell too many people. you know.
And
So
it's true, because I share the same type of identity history as you. Like, I was raised with no status, and then always told I was a half breed, and then I got my Métis card. Now I have my status, and I'm really happy you brought this up, because these colonial definitions and buckets of where they put us, that does cause grief. And I see it now a lot between the Métis and the First Nations, especially in Ontario and in BC. There's a big rift between those two groups because of there's new legislation that come out for the Métis, and now there's a bunch of folks coming along saying they're Métis, which they might be, but First Nations really struggle with it because they say that, well, the Métis aren't from here, they were never in BC or in Ontario. But the thing they forget is, number one, the Métis were never given reserve lands, and here in Alberta we have the settlements, and there were some colonies in Saskatchewan, but they no longer exist. And so those Métis they were forced to assimilate and move around, and get jobs and do what they had to survive. But another thing that we forget as Indigenous people in this country is that the Métis grandmothers are the First Nations aunties. And that will be what always will connect us. Those two women, those sisters, right? That one sister decided to marry a Scottish man or have children with, and another stayed with her tribe, or stayed within her culture. But those two cultures came together, and they stayed connected. Like, my grandmother she grew up Métis, or half breed, really, is what she always taught me. But she is a Cree woman, and her sisters married, though. They married First Nation men and got registered on the reserves they married into. But what made them any more Indian than her, right? It's all just these definitions by the Indian Act, by the colonial system, and it makes us fight against each other. And it serves the colonizer well, right? When we're busy fighting each other, we're not watching and paying attention to what they do. And I really love that you brought up the crab in the bucket. So for anybody that's in the room that isn't familiar with that terminology, think about crabs in a bucket. If you have a whole bucket full of crabs and one crab is crawling to the top and he's getting up to the top and all those other crabs are pulling him back down and then they're trying to crawl back up and they're getting pulled back down and another one and it just continues like this. And this is a common state of affairs in our First Nation and Métis communities. We work hard to hold each other down, sadly. But Curtis, sorry to cut you off. I wanted to thank you very much for reminding me about the impacts of how we're being defined and put into these terms. But go ahead. Did you want to finish off? Did you have more to add, Curtis, before we move on?
Also, some First Nations won't allow Bill C-31s to be members, or people think of them as, this is the Bill C area, and we also divide between full, like we do that to our memberships ourselves as bands and stuff. That's another category where we separate ourselves, And now we have S3, like the new legislation, and it just gets to be complicated,
Yeah.
I'm off reserve. I live in the city. I'm on reserve, and some people think like they make all these categories for funding, and then people kind of divide themselves and think different than other people. Like, oh, I'm more Indigenous because I was born on a reserve. Some people think that, and not all people, but some people do.
Yeah.
Like, there is that out there. Like, oh, I'm a full band member. I have more say in the nation. I've encountered that, eh? And I'm a band member now, but I wasn't before. I became a band member, now a voting member, and so I kind of went through the whole thing. I've been now I'm a voting member. I'm a First Nations person, but I also have cousins who are Métis, and some can pass for Native and some can pass for Native. A lot of them look white and a lot of them look Native, and we're all the same family, and they all have different statuses. Like it's just the way the government system has worked out that like we're at different categories, but we're all. I still all see everyone has family and relatives, and we're all the same people. How I look at it, like I remember one person told me once. He said, "Oh, I'm a Bill C-31." I told him, "No, don't believe that. That's that's what they want us to believe and think that we're that. You're more than a piece of legislation. That's not your identity as Bill C-31. Like you're a Nihiyao, you're a Sagawino, we're something more ancient than any of these things, these made up colonial concepts." So that's what I always tell people. Yeah, don't let them do that with these imaginary categories and boundaries and stuff and limit us to like government legislation that they created, try to define who we are.
And absolutely, again, you were just bang on about the funding too, because there's so much programming and funding is based on these definitions and who's who and how much of an Indian you might be. And like I'm an S3, but I'm also I'm a 6'2", which doesn't make sense to me. But I'm not even going to debate it. I'm not on a band list yet. I am registered to a First Nation in Saskatchewan, and I do want to reach out to them and see if they're willing to accept me on the band list. My great-grandmother was an original, apparently. So, that terminology too. Have you heard that in the nation? People talk about, oh, we're originals and you're not, like I've seen that. No talking twice till everyone's talked once. Sorry, real Native. Okay, Curtis, are you good, or you want to add some more?
I'll keep on going.
Okay, but stay up, and we'll come back. And I'm really happy that this is coming up because there's a lot of people in the room who maybe don't understand or have awareness around the colonial policy and the impact it's had on us and the way we treat each other. And it continues to serve Canada government and provincial governments well, right? Again, I will reiterate and probably say this more than once tonight that when we're fighting each other, we're not paying attention to what they're doing. So we're going to go Calby, Jana, and then ZB. So Calby, I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. If you want to add to the conversation, you're welcome to join in.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello again. Hi. I just thought this was very interesting today you brought. But my my thinking is that between Métis and First Nation people who are originally Cree, what I'm saying is being a Métis person might have given them like they might be passing like white, might have gotten more opportunity while others didn't. So I think for me, I say now it's time to really learn about the real culture and
Yeah.
the struggles and things that people went through that were not passing, that were discriminated against, that has faced so much lateral violence within themselves and between, because I had a conversation with somebody who said that she's Métis, but how the conversation was, I didn't know. Me as an African Somali person, sometimes I'm still learning, but I'm interested to learn more about what First Nations life, because I can see they had very beautiful culture. Like I still can like feel like I can relate to the culture in somebody who come from. But my conversation, the way she was explaining to me was like they're not doing good, on they're not taking I guess advantage of what opportunity is given to them. That's what the conversation they choose. She said they choose to be addicted and be do something bad. So my ideology with her, my question to her was like, as a person, me who came from a civil war country, I left my country at 6 year old, my home and everything, and we had to separate from my parents. I didn't choose that. So I don't think somebody who was taken away from their parents, from their community, they didn't choose to be taken away. So I feel like there has to be understanding when people are angry, it's coming from a place of hurt, and it's coming from a place of not having the opportunity, the platform, even if they wanted education, if they wanted to keep their family together, if they wanted stability, it wasn't given. Well, when I like, for example, when people tell me here, oh, you came here as immigrant and you're giving everybody, I didn't want to be immigrant. I didn't want to lose my home. You know why I'm here? My ideology, I'm here because of colonization.
Yeah.
Because my country was divided each other and was told by British Empire, one tribe is better than another, and we're still dividing each other. But the difference is Métis get to have more passing in Canada opportunities, a lot of opportunities, employment, job. So I think it's time to listen and be respectful and see when people are angry where they coming from.
Yeah.
Not to say, oh, they choose to be, sorry, I'm speaking a lot. I get so passionate about this because I say nobody chooses to be hurt, nobody chooses a disease, nobody chooses a generational trauma, and it's just time to think, to be quiet and listen and respect and show kindness and say, where is this person is hurting me, is hurt, is angry, but every behavior has a meaning. If you quietly listen where their pain and anger is coming from, is what is created. Whether if you're Métis, you're half, maybe it came from your grandparents or grandfather other side that hurt these people. So it's time to be listening and kinding and thinking about Canada saying, oh, we have equality, we have basic human rights for everybody. It's time to practice that teaching you guys do. Thank you. That's all I want to say.
Oh, thank you, Calby, so much for your voice and for your perspective and your kindness. I really appreciate you joining our conversation as a newcomer too. And I don't mean that you just arrived, but you're considered a newcomer, and we really appreciate voices like yours and supporting us. And I'm really sad that you experienced colonization too, and these things have happened to you. And I'm happy that you're interested in learning more about the First Peoples of this land. And the University of Alberta has a free course that you can take if you're interested in.
I'm interested to learn.
Yeah, it's free. Just go to the University of Alberta. Maybe I'll try to see if I can dig up the link, but I think it's easy to find. But thank you so much. One thing I heard from you is culture is deeper than the color of our skin. And so for those there's First Nation people that are full on status Indians, according to the Indian Act, that are very not white presenting. I guess I should be saying YT. I don't know if I'm going to get
better to say YT just in case.
Warnings. Yeah. Anyway, so YT presenting. My husband is, people consider him YT presenting, but you get him in a room full of our people, and to me, he just looks like the rest of them. So, but culture is definitely more than our skin color and more than our genetics. So thank you so much, Calby, for joining the conversation. I appreciate you. Hi. Jana, my friend.
Hi, I just wanted to say I really enjoyed listening to Calby talk as well, because that's the kind of interest I'd like to see more Canadians showing, in learning about Indigenous culture. Because we have people that have lived there their whole lives and have zero interest in learning, but you come here and you want to learn about our first people, and that is awesome. What was I going to add? Just a very simple sentence about lateral violence. Hurt people hurt people.
Yes.
And it's really important to remember that the people, when they're lashing out, it doesn't make what they're doing okay, but it's easier to remember that they're lashing out because they're in a place of pain and they don't know how else to deal with it. So and deciding, maybe having a plan ahead of time on how you're going to handle when lateral violence comes towards you. And like, do you walk away? Do you end the conversation? Do you engage it? And that answer is going to be different for everybody, and where you are on a certain day. But it's always good to just put some thought into how you want to respond to that, and if it's worth your energy. And that's something I'm doing, like with just my commenting on TikToks. Just deciding what's worth my energy and what am I wasting or expending energy that isn't getting value back for anybody, right?
Yeah.
Like sometimes
Absolutely.
It might be worth, like sometimes it might be worth approach, especially if it's publicly, because people need to know, but you have to decide, is it in your best interest?
I think the struggle for our people, especially when you think about in First Nations on reserve, because you have this tendency to be with your community, you're working for your community, you live in your community, you work in your community, so you're always seeing each other at social events and things like that. So it can become quite toxic and hard to avoid.
Yeah.
Right. And then I've seen where there's even groups, like there's small factions, right, of like kind of cliques, I guess to call them, where they're like-minded against the other couple of people, and then it gets to be quite tiring, and you end up lashing out too, and it's hard to control those behaviors. But I really appreciate, because I know you have your psychology background, so I'm really happy to have you as part of the conversation, because maybe you can help us talk about some tools and how to better address this, and maybe practice lateral kindness, like Curtis was saying. And I did pull up a sheet. Yeah.
But I think it helps to know that most of the time it's coming from a place where they're a hurting person. And you know what I mean? That they're lashing out at you because you've mirrored something or brought something into their thought that they just can't handle at that point in time, right? So they lash out.
Yeah.
And deciding whether or not kindness might be the better way to approach it, or just, I wouldn't say ignoring it, but maybe just not getting into it. And again, that's a personal decision, right? But I think it's okay to just give yourself permission to maybe not engage sometimes. Like Smarty did earlier. Just say, you know what? No.
Gotta go. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. Thanks, Jana. So before we go to ZB, I just have one more quote I want to read. Again, it's Jane Middleton Moss. And she says, when individuals feel inferior, inadequate, and afraid, they take on the qualities of the oppressor as a way of acquiring strength and an illusion of power. That really means something to me, because when you think about First Nation people that have lived on reserve, how inferior and powerless you must feel at sometimes. Even when it comes down to, think about it, people think, oh, you guys get free houses. These houses are often, yeah, sure, we might have a house. If you get on the housing list and you actually make it, that you're finally getting a house. Sometimes these houses, you're trying to put, 8 children in a 3-bedroom home. They're not built for the size of family to accommodate the number of people there. Plus, you may have extended family like elders and things. And so, like, all these services and this, and then another factor to this, and this kind of reminds me of what Curtis brought up earlier about funding and stuff. The First Nation I work for, and this is common across the country, is still working on a 1980s budget for housing maintenance fee. That's what they get. Nothing's changed since the 80s. So this feeds that feeling of powerlessness and inferiority in some way, because why are we not worth the same standard of living as everyone else? And then feeds into this lateral violence epidemic. So I just wanted to bring that to the conversation. And ZB, your turn, my friend.
Hi. Okay, I have many different thoughts after the wake that I just went to, where there was a lot of lateral violence.
At a wake?
Yeah, it was my
Sad.
dad's wake.
Oh,
Anyway, moving along. I'm gonna hop, skip, and jump over that because otherwise I will cry.
okay.
When it comes to the color difference, what I have found and how I get more easily accepted into the community and different communities at that is the fact that I recognize that there is a privilege of being fair-skinned or having the ability to completely white pass. And when you are fair-skinned or have the ability to white pass, you don't check your privilege and you talk and act like a colonizer a lot of the time. Right? And especially if you have not grown up in the community or around the community, that comes out full force, is what I have noticed. And a lot of my friends and, people I meet are very quick to pick that off about me, is the fact that I recognize those things. And I recognize when people prefer to talk to me over one of my friends who is dark skinned.
Oh.
And how protective I get of them in that, which is a part of the not understanding of the lateral violence that our fair skinned people go through, is that they don't see that as a problem. They're not picking up on these cues. And again, we've talked about this. If you grow up in Alberta, you know what you're looking for. You know these signs. You know the racial microaggressions, and you know them because ain't nobody who's fair-skinned in Alberta is sliding past the racial remarks in Alberta.
Yep.
Right? And this isn't a pick on our fair-skinned relatives. It's just something that you have to be aware of and mindful of when you are trying to integrate yourself back into the community, if you are reconnecting or reclaiming.
100%.
And when it comes to reconnecting and reclaiming, which was a part of like the whole thing that happened last week, um, I okay. So my auntie really likes to minimize my knowledge because I got apprehended. Um, and she likes to think that I don't know anything because I don't remember a lot of things, right? So she'll commonly call me white. And I'm sitting here like, uh, right? And it's that, but it's also in that time that I know I have to be quiet because I understand where she's coming from, but also um I have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of that comes from that she thinks that everything should be her way, like the real native was saying.
Wow. That's hurtful.
And yeah, that doesn't even begin to describe what happened last week, but like I'm going to leave that out of what we're talking about. But it's with still touching on it because it is a valid critique and a valid point.
Yeah.
And when it comes to those of us who have status under Bill C, I forget what number it is. I'm one of those
31.
people.
Yeah.
Initially, when I first applied for status, they came back and said that I didn't have enough native in me, which I was like, what? Like, I beg your finest of pardon. But obviously, we had some legislation that overturned that. But it's also, when we talk about that bill in particular of having a YT father, that we really need to start having radical discussions about some people's conceptions. Like in regards, I can fully be transparent and honest and open about this. I only exist because there was alcohol and my biological father was feeding a minor alcohol. Right? Like, that is not consensual. And, especially when we're talking mixed people, a lot of people forget that that is how a lot of us were made, is through the consumption of alcohol and the force feeding of that to our women / girls.
Sadly, it still happens today.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where, we really got to move and start having radical discussions about that. And I fully like own that, which is not mine to own, but it is to get that awareness out there that realistically we shouldn't be passing judgment on those of us who are mixed, because a lot of the time that wasn't consensual. Like, and
Well,
it's I could go on about that forever, but going back to how Raven was talking about how lateral violence is weaponized, and I find the term lateral violence is weaponized mostly by pretend Indians or by extremely, extremely white passing people who are borderline, we are questioning whether or not you are actually native. And that is where a lot of the weaponization of it happens, because I have found that those who, and this is an attack on anybody, by the way, this is for those who don't know where they come from and who are coming into the communities and trying to reconnect, they always usually try to be the loudest voice because they are YT passing and have lived as a YT person.
mm-hmm.
And they are the ones who are always the ones who are the loudest voice in the room. who fail to realize and to be held, and it's not even accountable. It is quite literally just asking who your grandparents are.
I
Okay.
I've seen this. It's like they feel like everybody should be blessed that they're now part of the club. Like you guys should all be happy that I'm now one of you in a way, right? Like it's kind of, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you know, I can relate to some of what you're saying because I grew up in the city. I am university educated. So once I started working on reserve, and that's like I'm back in the 90s when I first started working on reserve. Um, I didn't realize, right? Like wasn't very aware of myself. Like I said, I wasn't raised with culture or really with my indigeneity. Besides for I come from a parent and grandparent that wanted to leave it behind, that felt, you know what, we lost, let's just move on kind of thing. But anyways, so but over time I became very keenly aware of the privilege I have, even as an indigenous woman who has grown up with these other opportunities, right? Because I grew up in the city, I have one white parent, and I just was given different opportunities, and I became very aware of it, and I'm mindful. I try not to ever I don't want to come across as I'm smarter than anyone else or a show off. And even though I've sensed that that's what some people think sometimes, but it is what it is.
Okay, I have
Yeah,
one quick thing to add to that. And
Okay,
that
and
is, another discussion where if you've grown up urban, there is a lack of awareness of the privilege that you have had.
mhm.
Like I've grown up like several different places. I've grown up in homes, like with my family, not with my family, obviously, growing up in foster homes. And I have lived in small towns, which has given me that amount of perspective to know when I live in the city that there is a privilege, because it is the privilege of understanding how to move in the colonial world. That is the last thing that I need to add for the minute.
Okay,
all right. Thank you, ZB. All right, that Smarshy, I saw your hand. So
I
back
just
to
want to
you.
say, ZB, thank you for that amazing thought because you have hit the nail on the head. I am a white presenting Indigenous person. Nonetheless, I'm still Indigenous, but I know my privilege in this world. I don't have a lot of privilege, but I have some privilege. I have proximity to whiteness. And I've had to understand this because I thought there and I said, well, I'm Indigenous. I didn't realize me saying I'm just Indigenous and not uh, accepting the fact that I'm fairer skinned, that I was hurting people and not realizing that I was hurting people. And I understand that. So I thank you for bringing that to my attention. And you were not hurting anyone by saying the truth. That's what it is. We, as fairer skinned Indigenous people, are nonetheless still Indigenous. But we also have to understand that we walk with a certain level of privilege. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. And I appreciate everyone on this panel.
Thanks, Marshy. And I see you, ZB. You have one more you wanted to add.
This was said at the wake. As traditional people, we should be, when we talk negatively about other people, we are calling in that negative energy. And that is something that attaches to us. And that is something that we should start being mindful of. And especially if we're lighting tobacco at the same time that we are thinking negative thoughts about other people, is to put those negative thoughts aside for when we are lighting tobacco or anything like that, just because it does carry those thoughts up to creator. That was the last
Absolutely.
thing.
Thank you for that. No, that's so true. And I've heard this from elders so many times, and other wise people, that when we practice this type of negativity, it comes back to us too in some form, right? Like if it's not us directly, it could be our loved ones. It's some like a sense of karma in a way. And So again, that takes us to these teachings, right? And the importance of these teachings. And there's much more to these teachings. I encourage people in the room to have a look and Google these, because there's meaning behind each one of those words, and what they mean in specifically to the Anishinaabe culture. But it's I think really words to live by. If we're going to have some commandments, those are them. Okay. ZB, you're good now. We'll move on to. Okay, I don't see. So
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you. And now we'd like, Curtis, thank you for bringing up lateral kindness, because I found before, just before we started the show, I did find another information sheet that's put out by the First Nations Health Authority, and I don't know which province for sure. But they have a fact sheet about from lateral violence to lateral kindness. And I'm just going to read the opening paragraph, and I haven't even read it myself, so this is going to be a surprise to me too. We'll see what it stimulates for conversation. So, lateral kindness promotes social harmony. The impact of colonialism, residential schools, and cultural genocide continues to result in both intergenerational and contemporary trauma for many Indigenous people. These impacts have also resulted in lateral violence, which occurs when we direct our feelings of dissatisfaction or anger towards one another. Instead of recognizing that the true adversaries are colonialism, internalized racism, and oppression in other forms. Lateral violence, also referred to as lateral unkindness, is expressed in many ways, such as gossip, verbal and physical assaults, passive-aggressive behaviors, blaming, shaming, attempts to socially isolate others, demeaning activities, bullying, and threatening or intimidating behavior. Lateral kindness is an approach to addressing lateral violence. It is based on Indigenous values that promote social harmony and healthy relationships. Lateral kindness uses First Nations teachings about respect, fairness, and the importance of relationships to create an environment built on a foundation of kindness. And, I've practiced this myself, and I did find, not all the time, but on occasion, sometimes the perpetrators of lateral violence, when you practice kindness to them, it even upsets them more sometimes. Like, they get a little bit angry, but they're just being nice to me, you know what I mean? But it doesn't mean we shouldn't continue to practice it. And I really think this is such a wise way to be, and very mindful of our teachings and our ways. And I really hope that by having conversations like we are tonight, we can even just, there's a few of us in the room, but we can take these teachings home and share them with our people. So, Curtis, I'd like to turn it back to you. Do you have anything you'd like to add about lateral kindness? And have you seen any successes when you practice that?
Yeah, it's always important to have. And I remember where I got the term from is I did a workshop once, and this lady gave me a shirt and she told me about it, and that's where I kind of learned the concept from. And I was like, oh, that's great. So I kind of always I was stuck with that because we talked about experiences that we had, and about lateral kindness, and that's what I try to practice now, like do good in the world, and any way I can, like try to help people out and show them, love and compassion and those kind of teachings, and like not to be like to treat everyone equally, and try to like live like that in a good way. Those are traditional teachings, and so that like when I go, because it's so easy to get caught up in this negativity, and people can try to make you negative and make you angry, um, but like they try to get a rise out of you, and people will swear, get angry, but if you don't let them affect you, they won't be able to affect you. Like even if somebody swears at you or like does whatever, you could choose not to let internalize that, just kind of like,
Yeah.
and that's a hard thing to do, and it takes time, and we're all at different levels of healing and stages of our journey, and different things. And where I was 10 years ago is not where I am today. Like I'm still learning things, but um, yeah. So we learned that people have pain. That's why they have this lateral. They'll say things. Like I understood why that guy got mad and threw my letter on the ground, and I couldn't. So I didn't say anything to him, and I just kind of left it alone. And later on, he came and, in his own way, he apologized, and we had a smoke together, laughed and joked, and had coffee, and I took him as a friend, gave him a ride. He needed to go to town, so
Yeah.
so I drove him to town. And I could have just said, something to him and not helped him, but I chose to, to do that, because he was at a different place, and I was at a different place, and we never mentioned again, and we just kind of moved on. But I just seen, like, we could do though. We all make choices every day. We could choose to be angry at people that angered us, or we could, you know, work on our healing, because like it affects us too, and we're not healed, like when we hold that against people. And we don't. I try to see things where people are at and where they're come from, and so, in that way, I just, I felt good about it. Took him, gave him a ride. He needed to go to Athabasca, and we went for lunch, and bought him lunch, and we were okay, eh? But
Nice.
not everybody could be at that level. Some people, they'll be angry at you forever, eh? They'll hate you forever,
Yeah.
and they'll always, have that in them, and that's that where they're at, eh? But as long as you don't internalize it and take that, it's kind of good like that, and I was thinking about Buffy Saint Marie. Like, one of her teachings is on a video when she was talking about, like, we all know who Buffy is now, but back then I thought she was like real indigenous and she had some good teachings. She did have this one good teaching about, the buffalo dung, and how you can make a fire out of it, don't put it on your
Mhm.
face. And she was joking around about that. And I thought, yeah, she did get that a teaching from our people, but she internalized and taught it as her own. And she was like saying that this is her teaching as an indigenous person. And but back then we didn't know that she was not indigenous. And when people told me, I kind of hard to believe, because I love Buffy. Eh? She was such a, like, she was just a great person. Like, what she did, like what we thought, like being on Sesame Street. But then people start getting exposed for not really being indigenous. Like, pretendianism is a huge thing in Canada. Like, it's not only probably in the States, but more so in Canada, because there's a lot of legal benefits to it. And I think a lot of these things have to do with legal things, like money and access to resources and stuff like that. And that's why, people fight over these things. So it's, yeah. But yeah, 6-1 and 6-2 is another thing that's dividing our people, the second generation cutoff, and these
Yeah.
are all other issues that are related to, yeah. So that's enough for now.
I really appreciate that you brought up the choices that we make, because we can only control our own behavior. We can only control how we react to a situation and to somebody. And you're so right. Like, it is all about those choices in the moment. And it sometimes is really hard because we're all human, and sometimes somebody can be really hurtful, and your instant gut reaction is to lash out back again or be angry or something. So it's really a challenge to make those choices in the moment. But I've learned too, because I was also at one time was, I responded to things poorly, but over the years I've learned to step back for a moment, kind of think about it in the moment. It's not always easy. Sometimes it seems, especially if an attack is personal. But thank you for that, bringing that up about the choices that we make, and it's a choice on how we respond. And also, something I wanted to mention while I'm still chatting with you is that um, our men. I feel like the colonial institutions really focused their efforts on breaking down our men and the way that our men see themselves and each other. And I think it's such a beautiful thing to see our men are healing again and coming back to those kind ways, instead of also perpetrating the violence with each other and to our women. So it makes me happy to see. And I see that Elder Marie has joined us. So I'm gonna turn it over to you, small boy Marie. So thank you for joining us. This floor is yours, my friend.
Hi. Scott now. I've been thinking a lot about this whole race thing, and I find that it's because I think my thought processes work differently because mine come from my language, So I conceptualize things differently. I'm more of a holistic thinker. And I look at the words that we use. I know colonizer has become sort of an offensive term for the YT people and, or mistakenly YT people. The labels we place upon each other really affects our humanity. And there's two words that really have kind of stood out to me in terms of our communication to I will call it the colonial mindset, because colonial mindset carries with it certain characteristics, and I know this because I was forced to speak the English language, and I've become very proficient at it. I found there's two opposing mindsets. One is the colonial mindset, not to mean that it's any lesser than, but it does carry a realm of superiority thought processes. I don't know what else to call them, but it's thinking that one is they can't extend anything beyond their thinking that has validity. So I call that the colonial mindset, and our thought processes kind of work differently, where we accept humanity in all its deficiencies, if that's what we want to do. I don't know how else to explain it, but there's two mindsets that are kind of operating in opposition, and I notice the colonial mindset is kind of competitive, aggressive, very, very sometimes very abrasive, and it can get very brutal in its extreme behaviors. And I think we can see that with Trump's mentality. His is at the really far, far extreme. When I look at two words that we use in trying to deprogram our minds, two words that stand out is, one word is decolonize. How do you decolonize? Well, we're kind of using that as a term to, as a person that has been colonized, we want to decolonize our mindsets from that more competitive, type of thinking, and to think of the next person as being human. Then I look at another term that we use, and we say dehumanize, because the ultimate objective of the English language, I don't know, I don't think it's just the English language. I think it's French, maybe Spanish, maybe even, I don't know, is there a Jewish language? I don't know. But that mindset.
Really?
Oh, okay, I don't know my languages. In terms of how we conceptualize decolonize as an Indigenous person, we want to decolonize ourselves. But then you think about it and you flip the coin. How do we decolonize our YT brethren? How do we talk to them to be able to have them see themselves as with a restrictive type of thinking? And dehumanize, we kind of use that as a term to say I have been dehumanized by, not just by lateral violence from my own people, but society as a general. So we think of dehumanize. So, well, what is it about dehumanization that we want to express towards a colonial mindset? How do we humanize that colonial mindset? It kind of works both ways, where when we study our own psychology, our own humanity, and try to find a way where we can fit the colonial mindset to incorporate something that's actually valid and something that's beautiful that Creator made. Everybody made humanity, and that I mean, Creator made humanity as one human race. One just kind of strayed. I don't know if it's. Sometimes I think it's the lost tribe because somewhere along the way they've lost their humanity. I'm not saying not all English, French, Spanish are think that in that way because a lot of them are genuine good human beings. We know and we feel their vibe, but as you know, in general, like where it's really, really, really strong, that mindset is really strong is within governments, within the political realm, the spiritual realm. It's kind of trying to make its way in there. That's why there's this spiritual war going on. So the spiritual realm, uh, in our my immediate surroundings, people that I interact with, that has is kind of trying to make its way into our spiritual sense of being, where we do have discrimination between, our ceremonialists. Like I said, don't go to that one. He thinks that women are lesser than, or like so
Yeah.
that's kind of creeping its way into our spirituality, and that really affects my wanting to just. Why can't we just do this in the spirit that it's meant to be done in? It's sad reality. But my whole question to everyone is how do we work with the mindset that's kind of infiltrated all our psyche and our spirits, and we become less human, and it's I don't know. I get frustrated with it because it's not just in our community. It functions is very prevalent within our own family units. Like we've forgotten how to be Newi, like how to be our own, be like our ancestors, where we didn't. Everybody mattered. Not just the chief or the council or however they weren't structured like that years ago, but
Yeah.
so that's just kind of like I'm putting something out there that does where I feel the lateral violence is very, very ingrained into our psyche and our spiritual sense of being. Ekse.
Yes. Hey, Kinamas Compton. Oh, always remind me. I really appreciate that reminder of the humanity of us all. And it's where we're at today is so complex and probably going to be so hard to undo. And I've seen it too, what you said about, I know some that have a sweat lodge over here. Oh, don't go sweat with that guy because whatever, and this and that. And it's really unfortunate, right? And this was my struggle for being somebody that's an outsider that came to work in a nation, is that I didn't belong to any one family, right? So I treated everybody, to me, was all like I liked everybody. And
You're a family.
yeah, I didn't care what family they came from or, right? Unless somebody started to wrong me, then of course I, would try to address the situation. But this is a challenge too. When we try to confront the situation or we address the people that are perpetrating the lateral violence, they oftentimes, it's been my experience, now I don't want to speak for everybody, but I noticed that sometimes the folks that are the perpetrators of lateral violence have a big circle around them.
Oh yeah.
And they promote it as well. And it's really hard then to break it down because they have a fan group behind them that's supporting them and saying, oh no, you're right and that person's wrong. And it's really unfortunate that we have lost our way from these teachings and our old ways of being and that cultural identity that we once had so deeply rooted in us.
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's
And
it's truly the residential schools and all of the colonial policy that was implemented and enforced upon us has
it's
been
really,
effective.
oh, it really has done some damage. Like, I mean, not some, a lot of damage to everybody. And I remember my dad telling me about his dad, who's my indigenous side, attacking him. And I was like, why would he do that? Like, he also had a drinking problem, and there, it stemmed from so much. And I asked my dad a couple of months ago, or my aunt, and even my aunt was grandpa in a residential school or great grandma, and he's like, no. But it almost seemed like he was because it just, it's
Yeah,
that mindset of he's not good enough because he's who he is.
yeah. And that did trickle out. That's not just something we see on reserve and out of residential schools. Like something that I'm going to share a personal story about, and I think this is a form of lateral violence too. But so, and I couldn't understand this, but I'll start from the beginning. So, my dad, who I speak about, and he struggles with his indigeneity, he told me that his mother, my Cookham, so she was the youngest of 14, and she had lots of sisters, and many of her sisters married First Nations and moved on to reserves. So my dad told me one time, he's like, you know what? Even grandma didn't like the Indians. She'd take us to go visit her sisters on the reserve, and she wouldn't even let us leave. She wouldn't let us go play with our cousins. She just held on to us tight and wouldn't let us out of her sight. And I always thought that's such an interesting, like, wonder why that was. And then I teach a course, right? So I was in Saskatchewan teaching some training to some Saskatchewan First Nations who told me, and this area is where my father's from, there were actual Métis colonies that were adjacent to the First Nations, to the Indian reserves. And if you were Métis and you were caught on the reserve after 5 o'clock, the RCMP could arrest you, and they could also take your kids to residential school. I think that's probably what my grandma was scared about. But
Right.
my dad was a small boy, right? And probably internalized it as, nobody explained to him what the reality was. But that has led to, lateral violence from him to Indigenous people, to me even, and then me back out to other Indigenous people. And just getting to the bottom and understanding these circumstances that led to these outcomes helps us heal from them. And I tried to share with my dad that this, he's now 82 and he's not, he's set in his ways. But it's been a growing experience for me. And I'm really grateful, though, that he did actually share that with me. And it gave me some awareness to, what happened to him and why that was. Because even my cookum, she used to teach me, like, look at those nichies sitting on the street, because she'd come to visit us in Calgary, right? And you'd still, back then in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, we'd still see the odd, nehiao on the street, unfortunately. And she'd point them out as if they were bad. I'm really fortunate that I didn't internalize that in the same way. I always I thought it was pretty awesome being an Indigenous person. But my mom, my non-Indigenous parent, was the one who really actually taught me to have that pride of where I come from and who my ancestors are. I just
If I
wanted to
may say
share.
one thing before I like doze off, because I'm getting pretty tired. Um, I have been told generational trauma is not a thing. What happened to my ancestors does not affect my family or me. I've also been told, oh, it's okay, Smarsh, you're too white. They won't find you. That in itself is like, whoa, 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 wait a minute. I know I'm more white presenting, but that's besides the point. There are there are Indigenous women and boys and girls and even men that are white presenting that still go through the MMIW experience, and it's not just one demographic. It's it's not just one side of our culture. It's everyone, you know. And I had to explain to these people how hurtful just that one sentence was. And they're like, oh, well, you are white presenting. I said, yeah, I get that. I look at myself in the mirror every day when I brush my teeth, wash my face, wash my hands. I know who I am. But the fact of the matter is, when you say that stuff, it is very dismissive of the cases that we have going on.
Yeah.
And even Brit says we come in all shapes, colors, and sizes. Not one shoe fits all. And it's stuff like this that needs to be talked about.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that we could start the conversation. And just in case you said you were tired, so I just want to, before you do leave us, Marshy, is I encourage you to define your boundaries and learn. I know it's sometimes hard because I see how passionate you are in understanding your history and the history of our people and defending our position and our rights and all, land back, all of those things. But sometimes we have to take care of ourselves and say what you need to say. But when people aren't listening, it's try to remind yourself of where you need to put your energy so that you
Oh
protect
yeah.
yourself from that lateral violence too, because I felt sad when you told me that you'd experienced that. And I'm hoping that maybe this conversation has helped a little bit with that, and even those in the room. So a reminder to those in the room: tapping is clapping and sharing is caring. We've got about another half hour to continue our conversation.
I
And
mean,
yeah, go ahead, Smarsh.
I don't really think I don't know who I am, essentially, because I do know where I come from. I do know who I am. And I have exited those friendships. I don't talk to those people. I
Right.
know my boundaries and that's it.
That's good.
So it's
And
knowing that I have those boundaries and I'm able to set them.
you talked about generational trauma, and I do believe in blood memory. I believe that that's a thing, and that our bodies, our psyche, as Marie speaks about
Mm-hmm.
too, recalls and knows what our ancestors experienced, or we wouldn't feel the way we feel today, and the
Oh no.
connection we feel to land. Like going through what's happening with Donald Trump and his threat of the 51st state is heavy for us as Indigenous people. I feel like, oh my God, we were on a path of reconciliation, and heading, I felt like through
Oh
some
yeah.
positive change. Now all of a sudden we're like, holy crap, we're going to be colonized again.
Right. And
Recolonize.
we're trying to get out of we're trying, like Lisa had said, decolonize and rehumanize is what we need to be doing. But
Yeah,
with this government in the US and it coming and their rhetoric coming up here, it just makes me, it's so sad, you
Yeah.
know? I don't want to go back to the days where we had to be on reserves and have a card to come back on and leave and have to get a note to go off reserve for whatever reason. I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to blood quantum or anything like that. I
yeah.
want to keep going forward and progressing forward. And we're not going to do that if we let this get us all down.
I agree, and I really have faith in our people. I know we're still on a path of healing, and there's still a lot of our folks, sadly, that are struggling with the outcomes of all of this through addictions and homelessness and underemployed, undereducated at times, just experiencing needing
Discriminated
this,
against.
yeah, all of that stuff, right?
Yes.
I was hoping we would get further, and what scares me about that circumstance is like, do we have enough strong, healthy Nehiyao that are going to be able to stand our sacred grounds together and prevent this from happening? I really believe we do, but
Yeah. I wanted to address one of the questions.
Yes, please go ahead, Marie.
Yeah, why do people on the reserve not treat those trying to reconnect kindly? Um, it to me it's kind of like a double-edged sword, where on the one hand, you we want to and I'm one of the ostracized in my community, so I know what feeling that feels like, is not to be treated kindly by your own people. So an outsider coming in to fit in. And strangely enough, we do accept like on our reserve anyway, and and it's a big community. Like we're about 30,000 strong. We have I don't know if he's Chinese. It's got to be Chinese food. Yeah. So there's a Chinese entrepreneur that has been there for decades, and he's kind of like one of the community. And there's another one that's the Japanese, and like it. And we have no, what do you call those? It starts with an L. Not Latinos. We have some Filipinos. We have different people that have kind of made their way and have been accepted as part of the community that supports our doesn't really support our they like our money. Oh, I don't they don't they don't build uh whatever the monies they make, it goes off the res. So they don't really add to our economy, but as human beings, they're accepted as part of the community. So a lot of the being ostracized or being not accepted coming in as an outsider, and I'll use my late auntie as an example, where she, even though she was never accepted back into the band as a band member, she married out for having married a Métis, and she lost her Indian status, whatever that goes with it. She tried from the time she divorced him to I was about 40 years maybe. She tried to get back into the band, and they would not bring her back in. But even though that she wasn't accepted back in on the band roles and whatever else that comes with being a band member, she was able to acquire an old house on the reserve, and she stayed in that old house, with the community's acceptance. There was nothing in writing. We just kind of, one of my uncles just let her live in there, and that's where she died. But one of the things she taught me in my lifetime with her was humility is one of your it as hard as it is to be humble. It's a lot easier to live with the hate, the discrimination, I get mad sometimes because I get so ostracized, and it hurts and whatever. But the humility part of it is one of the things that carried our ancestors throughout the whole genocide. Didn't matter what, my dad being a prime example. He didn't find out till his mom had died, till he went to be the altar boy for her funeral in the church, and he saw all his relatives in the church, and
Is
it
that
was
when
only
is that when he found out he was Native?
no, it was only when he found out that his mom died. Like he
What?
was in residential school, and that was how he found out, was he was the altar boy for his mom's funeral
Oh my
without
God.
knowing that was his mom in the casket.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
My
so he lived that the humility. He was able to work around it and still be able to work within uh, uh, the prejudices of our own people, because he was a very strong. He farmed our own his land, and then he started construction on a company, and the whole crab in the bucket thing came out, and I remember one thing he said to me when the last of the tandem trucks got towed away by the repossession people. I stood there crying, watching them tow that last unit out. Like we had a trucking company, and a lot of dirty politics happened. But when I was watching, and I was watching, like how everything that we invested our family funds into was being towed away. The very last, symbol of what our family tried to do as a family unit. I was crying, and he comes up to me and he says, "E kai mato." He says, "Don't cry." He says, "Steel you can replace, but you cannot replace life, and you cannot ever replicate." He said this all in our language. You can never replicate what we did with this family company, trucking company, excavation company that we started. It taught our people how to work. It taught our people that we can do, whatever entrepreneurial things we want to do. And he had a grade 5 education. He was able to do all that. So humility really, really helps us deal with our own struggles as human beings.
Can I explain? I think that's beautiful. Can I explain?
Just one moment, okay, Flutter? Sorry, if I can just ask you for 1 second, because I want to, I pulled out my humility poster.
Yeah.
And I'd like to just read the teaching to everybody.
Okay.
Okay, so humility is being humble, not arrogant. The wolf represents humility because of its giving nature and devotion to protecting and working for the good of the wolf family and the welfare of the pack. Wolves mate for life and are generous and loving parents, setting an example of what our communities and family systems should be. Native people have great respect for the wolf because of its love for family and its protective instincts. And this really, Marie, thank you so much for bringing that up. And the way that you shared this story about your father really does demonstrate that. And it's such an important teaching. So thank you. Hi so much. And
Yeah.
before we go to you, our way is to let Marie finish, and then we can turn the floor to you. So Marie, if you had more you wanted to add, let me know.
I'm good. I just wanted to bring out that point where acceptance of self is important, and that humility that plays a very, very key part of our being as humans to that, to move forward, even despite the onslaught of barriers that we have, the loops that we have to keep jumping through in life, and it's just akamemo, just keep on plugging away, keep moving forward. It's all we can do.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up, acceptance of self. And then in the comments, Lisa said too, acceptance of self and others. And it goes back to the whole practice of love and kindness, right? And
Yeah.
but that's been taken from us, and it's hard to accept ourselves sometimes. I know that in my own life, I had a time where I probably didn't like myself very well when I think back about my behaviors. But okay, well, we'll turn the floor to Flutter then.
Okay, my husband it's his story, it's not mine. His grandmother was in one of the first Manitoba residential schools, and she's kept running away, and she was sold to the CPR. So at 7 or 8 years old, she was put into indentured servitude. And so her family, she met an Italian man that bought her out of her slavery, and they moved to Vancouver, and they hid the fact that they had Indigenous family. And actually, her generation didn't. His mother's generation did. My husband would have been pulled in. He was a teenager in the 60s. And they hid him, and they put him down as not Indian, not Indigenous. They put him down. His paperwork all said that he was Italian. He learned Italian. They learned the Italian culture. It wasn't till his great niece was born and looked Indigenous and just about broke a family up, that the secret that had been kept for 2 generations brought out. And we had taken some children from residential school that didn't have family because we'd worked with families not families, but helping the kids find places when we moved to Saskatchewan. And so we have 2 sons that their parents both got lost during their time in residential school, and we made sure that they connected to their reserves and their families, and they've gone back and they're on reserve again. So we understand and loved the culture, and he didn't know it was his own culture.
Wow.
He comes from the Teepee Creek First Nations Dakota band in Manitoba, and there isn't very many of them. They don't have a treaty. They don't have a treaty. They bought the land they sit on. But his struggle to reconnect has been his story was so hard to find. His connection back to his reserve was very difficult. And he has tried really, really, really hard. We actually went over to South Dakota, and he's been going to ceremony and stuff, and he got a name, and he's been accepted across the border, but he hasn't been accepted in his own family. And they even call her the lost pearl. Like, they didn't know what happened to her. But they aren't accepting. And he's not young. Like, we're not young anymore. And he really has a very good education and wanted to give back to his own community. And he just feels like they're very unkind. Like, they treat him like he doesn't deserve to step onto the land that his grandmother left.
That is tragic. I thought maybe I was done hearing all the news stories. I had no idea about them indenturing young people.
Yeah, she was indentured at 6.
So she had to work for the Canadian Pacific Railway.
Yeah, and she has scars from being whooped, and it was just, her story was just atrocious.
It's terrible. It's
And she was sold for $6,
oh my God.
which in 1920 was probably a fair amount of money. It wasn't a lot still, but it was.
Yeah, the 60s, they were selling them at, I lived with a guy that was sold for $20,000. That was in the 70s, early 70s, right at birth. So it's a pretty hard thing to live with and trying to come to terms with as you get older. He's 53 now, and he still struggles with it.
Wow. So $6 back then is worth about $95 now.
Oh,
Wow.
wow. And his grandfather had to pay, it was 26 or 27,000 to get her back.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what were they going to just do with her? Keep her till she's...
She was going to
Marriages?
die in servitude. She would have died in servitude.
This is unbelievable. Okay.
So, and he has a lot of skills. My husband is an environmental scientist
Yeah.
and would love to give back to his community.
And
And
see, I'm
has
gonna share
other-
this.
And
Yeah.
has 2 other communities, and they won't. He plans communities and cities, and he guest professors across the world, but wants to give to his own hands.
I'm wondering, Marie, if you can maybe shed some light on this. I feel the same way. Like, I am educated. I'm a professional biologist. I've worked for almost 30 years in my career. And when I called the nation that I was actually erroneously registered in the wrong nation, but this has been fixed now. But when I called that First Nation, I asked them, like, are you taking in new members? Are you adding people to your ban list? And the first thing that the person on the phone asked me was, well, what do you want?
Yeah.
I was like, I have a house, I have an education, and I have a job. Right? Like, I just want to connect to my people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how, like, I know you talked about it too, that you yourself face this, being ostracized, and
Yeah.
how do we get over that?
I know with PT, he's forever grateful to me for, first letting him live with me on the res, so he got the res experience. But he learned a lot just by living with my family, he learned about our own idiosyncrasies, our own prejudices, as a family unit, that we're only human. And he also learned our way of being by attending ceremony and stuff. Wasn't necessarily on our own reserve, but going off to other ceremonies where we knew they were happening, and being and ceremonies. The thing about ceremonies is, um, in reality, in the way I grew up around ceremonies, is you come as you are, and there's no you don't have to buy a ticket, or you don't have to be invited. The norm is you bring, a pot of soup, or a basket of bannock, or some, blueberries, whatever you want to add to the feast that's happening. Every ceremony has a feast. And it doesn't matter. You will face some challenges with the ones that are kind of like the real rigid gatekeepers, but it's the ones that are very accepting, and usually they'll correct the gatekeepers. The ones that are true to our humanity, to our ancestral way of being, they will correct the gatekeepers that say, what's that white tea person doing there, or who's that strange man that's sitting over there? Like it's I don't know. I call it the I don't know if gatekeeper is the right word, but the protecting the unit, protecting the family. I don't know if that makes sense, but it seems to make sense now when I think about it. Yeah, it's learning how to work through those. He did a lot of work, even with his own family, when he was going back to his bio after being raised in a Dutch family with a very, very strong religious upbringing, and then he himself being sent to a boarding school and stuff like that. So all that culminated in him really searching around for his roots and wanting so much acceptance from his own bio family, and
I think that's what my
that
husband's
took
looking
him
for too.
years. It took him years and years to actually feel that acceptance. And there's still certain family members that will not accept him, and he doesn't live on the reserve. He's still that total acceptance is. I don't know if it'll ever be there, but he is recognized by siblings and his bio mom, and his bio dad just passed away, and he took it pretty hard. So it is trudging through your own sense of being and trusting in your own protective spirit, I guess you would say, to help you work through that. As what, even as much as I wanted to belong, it doesn't hurt anymore. You get to the point where the discrimination, the ostracization doesn't hurt anymore. And you just learn to live with it and try and work around it.
You said something that really kind of sparked a thought in me. Like you said something about protecting the family and protect. I'm wondering too, is protecting the community in a way too, by maybe being resistant to newcomers, because so much has been
we
taken.
do understand, because his grandma is one of the ones that they knew. They thought she was dead. They didn't think his line existed.
So I'm sure it's a shock to them too in some way. So I'm curious, Marie, if say someone like myself and even like Flutter's husband, if I were to go to my nation and maybe I slowly go and I start coming to powwows, or being around for events, and maybe they get to see me in some way more often. And maybe I can find a sweat lodge keeper. And is that a good way to maybe start introducing myself back to my people?
Yeah, I would encourage it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. And if you face a little few of the gatekeepers, well, there's other people that are around to provide you that are more welcoming. Yeah.
We did go to one of his band's sun dances and they asked us not to attend again, to go to the ones in the States. And we respected that. We have not gone back, but he felt that a very big, don't come again.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably hit the gatekeepers. It's it's a hard barrier to work through, and there's no forcing it. There's no forcing it. Like I've lived long enough to know you can't, as much as, I'll use an example of attending an interview knowing full well you're not going to get the job because of who you are, and because I'm very, very, I carry, myself knowing who I am, and then I call it as I see it. Sometimes not in a very, very diplomatic way, but I've learned to tone it down. But it's learning how to, go through the motion of, I know I'm not, it's not knowing you can get the job, knowing you're the most qualified, and then you find out who they hired you, somebody that doesn't even have any computer skills, or so. You sit there and you have to laugh, and then they stack the deck. They stack the deck. The counselor's wife was the one that got the job. And he was one of the interviewers. So that was, I just blatantly
Conflict
asked.
of interest.
I just said, you're her. I know one of the candidates is your wife. I said, I know who's going to get the job. And I said, where does nepotism fit into all this? And interviews over. I was shoot out. So it is that our people can, and I think, because of the imposed systems of government that are on our lands now, they've kind of they gatekeep the colonial types of governance, how you're expected to follow the colonial rules, and it's superficial in so many ways. Even our tribal constitution doesn't reflect who we are. Because they've incorporated a lot of that colonial governance way of doing things, and it takes away from our humanity as a tribe.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to give Flutter. I muted you so that we could give Curtis a chance to add to the discussion if he'd like to, just because we're trying to be mindful of our way and giving everybody an opportunity to speak. So Curtis, did you want to add anything? If not, that's fine too. But I know you said that you were kind of new to joining your nation too.
Yeah. I always lived in my community.
Yeah.
I lived like maybe a kilometer from the reserve. And so, like, I always lived in the community, and I spoke the language. Like, I spoke Cree and everything, because I was raised by my grandmother, so I kind of knew the language. I always saw myself as a native, but I just wasn't registered. But, but it was always good. One thing I was going to talk about is, identity is a big thing in our communities, and finding that. I know a lot of our people, they speak the language, and they live the lifestyle, and they know the history and the culture, but they don't have the card, like, the First Nations card, but they're relatives, and they practice they speak Cree fluently, they go to the ceremonies, and, but for whatever reason, they're just not, because of their maybe 6'2" generation cutoff, they don't have status or band membership, But a lot of people too, because I've done DNA testing just to, to see who my relatives were, and to, see how much, so I've done 4 DNA tests since 2014, and I kind of, checked that out. And I've met a lot of relatives and friends, people who were adopted and were looking to find how they were connected. And I got hundreds of messages from people. Some I was able to help and figure it out, because I became into genealogy and all this kind of stuff and DNA, and finding people, like, if they were adopted out, because a lot of people didn't know they were native. They did DNA tests, and they were like, "Oh, you're my second cousin. How's that?" And I was like, "I don't know. Let's figure this out." And then some of them did get their Indian status, and then find out what happened, like their history. And we found relatives that we didn't know existed,
Wow.
And some of them were on the other side of the ocean. Like different things have happened. During World War II, a lot of our people went over there and had children, and like different stories like that. There's so many of them. So many different stories, and I helped quite a few people find where they're from, because I would tell them where I'm from, who I am, and and then they would be able to get either their Métis card or their First Nation status. And at least they got to know who they were, or like what family they were from, or what tribe, and stuff like that. But a lot of DNA stuff. When I did it, I wasn't expecting to find that many people. I was doing it more to see how much native like DNA I had, and how much European. I was doing it more for that, but then this whole thing about finding relatives, with the DNA and connections, I found so many of them, and yeah.
It's amazing. Hey, I've never thought to do my DNA yet, but I think I
Do 23andMe is good. Our ancestry DNA.
okay.
Our Ancestry has a DNA sale going on right now. It's one of the cheaper ones, one of the better ones. And
Okay.
23andMe is good too if you want to do your like Y DNA, and it's kind of like your father's fathers are your maternal DNA. And
Okay.
I did my maternal DNA, and it goes back to a native haplogroup A2, which is a Native American haplogroup that goes back 15 to 20,000 years in the Americas. And I traced my seventh great grandmother, on my family tree, like my mother's directly back to an Ojibwe woman. I don't know how to say it in Ojibwe, but she had a Chippewa Ojibwe name from the Red River. And I don't want to really say it because I can't pronounce it properly because I can't speak Chippewa. But yeah, she was born in the late 1790s in the Red River. And so I have like her DNA, like her Y DNA passed on. It was like daughter to daughter to daughter to like 12 generations back. And yeah, so that was just fascinating. I was able to hire a genealogist to confirm everything, like a researcher, and I did the DNA and found all that. And it's just interesting that I had that ancestry. And yeah, so it's quite interesting because I've been researching DNA and finding relatives. People would send me messages like, "Who are you?" and "What tribe are you from?" And I just found that I'm part Native, and I was adopted. My records are sealed, and I don't know how to like anything about anything. So I tell them, "Well, I'm in Alberta. I'm Cree," and they're like, they know what tribe. And then we try to figure out, and I show them my tree and try to see where how close we are and figure that out. So that was quite interesting.
That's amazing. I think I'm going to check it out. But it's 3 minutes to 8, and we're trying to keep our sessions down to a couple hours now because we do upload these onto YouTube. So I'll give everyone that's on the panel, and I did notice that ZB, I'll let you back up so you can say some closing remarks. And I want to just from me, I'm going to say that practicing lateral kindness, I think, is going to be our solution going forward. And, we're all going to heal in our own way, in our own pace. And when we understand each other, it really helps, in taking that time to understand one another. It helps us with that lateral violence and practicing our lateral kindness. So for some closing remarks, I'm going to pass it to Curtis, and we'll go up then to Flutter and ZB, and then we'll close off with Elder Marie. And I just want to remind everybody that Beaver Politics does have a show every night. I encourage you to check out our page. Monday nights is Indigenous Matters. Tuesday night is Frontline Feminist, where she does the news hour. Wednesday night, oh my gosh, I'm drawing a blank again. I think I need to make sure I get rid of this cold. Go and have a look on the Beaver Politics page. There's some videos there that promote each different show. We have new beavers joining, so please, I think, have a look, and I thank you all for attending tonight and listening to our conversation and adding to the discussion in the comments. I apologize if anyone feels like I don't really pay much attention to the comments, because I really like to practice spending the time with the folks on the panel. So with that, thank you all very much. Curtis, give us some closing remarks.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining, and I always learn something new from all the people that talk and tell their stories. And I just want to say in Cree, Beaver is umsk. So if you want to know what Beaver is, and yeah, great discussion today, and look forward to next Monday. And what's the topic for next Monday?
I don't know yet. Do you have something in mind?
How about 6162? If we get that Louis Maudie, he talks a lot about that.
that you talk. Yeah, okay. And thank you very much for sending that contact.
He has a website if you want to check him out and check out his videos.
I will. Yeah, and
YouTube
I
video.
follow him too. But that's a really good idea. We can talk about that a little bit. And thank you, Curtis. I appreciate that.
All right. Thank you. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Go ahead, ZB, my friend.
I just wanted to add, with doing DNA tests, you should know that 23andMe got hacked, and they lost their board of directors in one day. So none of your DNA is safe there. Just to give you the forewarning.
Good to know.
Yeah. Hopefully they don't try to. I don't know what they could do with my DNA, but yeah, I heard about that.
Thank you,
Well,
ZB.
it's I don't think it's what they can do with your DNA. I think it's okay. This is a little bit conspiracy theory-ish, but it's about them trying to figure out what makes us so resilient and what, like, it's our genetic markers, right? And to see what the epigenetic markers have are.
Interesting.
Like I said, a little bit conspiracy theory, but you know.
I want to add to that.
Perry in the comments says they're trying to clone the Nietzsche's. Go ahead, Marie.
They'll have a lot of 6'1s and 6'2s.
One of the things that in my rabbit holes, one of the rabbit holes I went down, my sister took me there, by the way, is our DNA is so distinct, so unique from other, I don't know, for lack of a better term, other races, because it stayed so pure till contact. And what my sister uncovered is that they one of the reasons why they took our people, and I'll use the Queen as an example, where they took 12 children and they never came back, and that was because they feast on them, because they need the DNA to maintain their own purity. That's adding to your conspiracy theory.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So yeah. So we're that might be another reason why they're hanging on to your DNA so they can track us. I don't know. I hope you guys didn't get the jab, because I sure as hell didn't, because that's another way they can track us too. But
It's
yeah,
funny.
I just wanted to thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. And I just wanted to say they left that part out in that series called The Crown. They didn't talk about that part.
I don't
But
have a
ZB
TV, so I don't get to watch all those.
That's smart,
Yeah.
though. ZB,
Yeah.
were you finished, or did you want to continue?
For my closing remarks, I'm gonna say, for anybody who is thinking about reconnecting, to do it in a good way, but I'm gonna leave you with my dad's words, and that is to come home. Your people need you.
Yep. What's up?
Thank you. That just inspired me to go and reconnect with the people that I belong with. All right, Elder Marie, the floor is yours, my dear friend.
I guess that's always been my argument with my leadership. You know, why do we discriminate against our own? Because the bigger the numbers, the stronger we are. That's my motto anyway. You know, because given the royalties and stuff, if we had more numbers, we would have more in our trust fund, and you know that goes on. But with respect to searching for your roots, there is two other sources. There's those church records in our area. I don't know how far they go, but the treaty pay lists are really hard to track from now back to 1951. 1951 is when the treaty pay list stopped, and then they started changing changing our numbers, our band numbers. As you're born now, you get your own number once you get registered on the band rolls. So, but if you can find somebody from 1951, it's easy to track them back to on the treaty pay list. So that's
Okay.
just a word of advice. With respect to our topic of the day, I just want to say that, if we don't, maybe I like the term lateral kindness. It goes along with our own humility and reciprocity and all the good stuff that our ancestors perpetuated in their way of being. So I just wanted to encourage that be kind. Doesn't matter, who they are, non-judgmental, and just be your just the most awesomest human being that you can be.
Hey.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you
Thanks,
so much.
Noah. Yeah.
I just in closing, I found too on this one fact sheet that the First Nations Health Authority has. They have something to be mindful of. Every person's Bill of Rights, and there's 14 of them. I'll read them quick, and we'll close the night. So number 1 is I have the right to be treated with respect and dignity. 2, I have the right to experience and express my own feelings. 3, I have the right to say no without feeling guilty or selfish. 4, I have the right to ask for what I want, and of course, the other person has the right to say no. 5, I have the right to consider my own needs in a relationship. Number 6, I have the right to change my mind. 7, I have the right to decide what to do with my own property, body, and time. 8, I have the right to take time for myself. 9, I have the right to do things as long as it does not take away from the rights of another person. 10, I have the right to make mistakes without being punished or humiliated. And I have the right to bring up a problem with another person and discuss it. It was number 11. Number 12 is I have the right to be listened to and taken seriously. 13, I have the right to feel good about myself. 14, I have the right to live without fear. And with that, as one of my colleagues here on Beaver Politics, Progressive Moose, likes to say, stay safe and stay sane. And I want to say, stay deadly.
Aquí está.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah. Love you.
Love you too. Take care.